Hello and welcome to our regular Monday analysis of all things currencies. Well, in the studio today, I have Jean-Francois Owczarczak from MJT. Jean-Francois, thank you very much for coming in again today.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Now, today you want to look at all things US dollar again. Take us through your analysis just at the moment, starting perhaps with the euro dollar.
Well, the euro dollar we have here on the screen, and basically the weekly and the dailies are a bit contradictory at the moment. We think, and I'll focus here quickly on the longer term, the weekly charts. It's a very weak uptrend which recently emerged out, and as you see we have no targets here, which means that the targets are not in accordance with the trend direction. So we would qualify it as a weak uptrend for now, and mostly a sideways movement. Now we focus on the daily, which is more short term and gives us the direction over the next few months. It's been in a downtrend since earlier this year. We did have a retest in the month of June, and it seems like the downtrend has been reinstated. We've seen a new retest at the moment, so the trend is having a difficult time in accelerating, but for the time being it's still heading down. So the daily would still be negative. That said, the hourly is now in a bull and is moving up, and it has made it above our corrective targets, and so it's pointing up to impulsive targets above the 133.50 level. That means that even though on the daily we're still quite negative, we do have to see this move out towards the end of it, or at least a resume downtrend here before we can take any risk to the downside.
Okay, that's the euro dollar. Let's take a look at the dollar against the yen. Are we seeing the same sort of trend there with the yen?
So let's just flick on it. It's here, dollar yen. You could see, and we've been toning this for quite some time, the weekly is still up, and there's still time and potential up over the next few quarters. And so we almost brushed off this consolidation down from this intermediate top, which happened in the second quarter. And our targets are still giving us quite a bit of potential and quite a bit of time. Now, if you look at the daily, it's also still heading up. The recent correction has been brushed up quite easily, and we're slowly getting towards the highs that we had in the month of May. There's still some potential up, and what is interesting to see is that our daily is pointing towards 110 over the next few months, and our weekly is pointing towards 110 over the next few quarters. So there's some convergence there, and so we're still bullish on dollar yen. That said, we just had a correction on both dollar pairs, and but the correction has been very, very shallow on dollar yen. And so we're waiting for a reinitiation of the acceleration. So a bit of a mixed picture here on the dollar, and I just wanted to have a look at the mosaic. And just to tone that for the time being, most currencies, and most trends on the daily are still in the favor of the dollar. If you look at all the ones quoted against the dollar, that's still all heading down, and the ones quoted in the direction of the dollar are mostly heading up. Just an exception, Hong Kong dollar, but that's something quite special. Okay,
so we've seen euro there and the yen in relation to the dollar. Let's take a look at interest rates at the moment.
Okay, well, I think it's quite interesting because a lot has happened. There's a lot of debate about inflation, deflation. And so I prepared a small private selection with a few charts on rates. And let's go into here. And let's look at it on a weekly basis first.
And we've seen Treasury bonds fall quite rapidly recently, haven't we?
Agreed.
Tips. And we're going to see this. Is that going to be evident here in this mosaic you're bringing?
It is. I mean, as you can see, these are weekly charts. You have the 30-year Treasury bond, you have the Japanese government bond, you have the notional gilt, you have the Bund futures, Swiss long-term bond, and I've put in the iShares Barclays Aggregate Bond Index, which includes a lot of corporate bonds, the corporate bonds index from Goldman Sachs, and also the iShares TIPS. And basically, as you could see, most of the Anglo-Saxon markets are rolling over and quite aggressively. There seems to be a bit more resilience in Japan and in Europe. But what I think is very interesting is that you could see the TIPS, which are the inflation-adjusted bonds, which are seeing almost the most aggressive correction.
And why is this? Why are we seeing this?
They're most sensitive to interest rate changes, but also it seems like it's not the question is not a question of inflation in this bond correction. It's more a question of real rates adjusting up from very, very low levels. Now, the question one can ask is why is this happening? Well, it could be that the economy is doing better and that investment can sustain higher borrowing costs. What it could also be on a more negative note is that basically the market believe quantitative easing is maybe coming towards a period where it's going to be tempered, as a lot has been mentioned over the last few months. And is that not too early in respect to a growth in the economy, which is still quite subdued and just starting to pick up? And that would be my question.
I see. So that's why perhaps we're seeing some of these treasury bonds falling quite rapidly. Obviously, with this week, we've got a number of central bank rate decisions coming up. We've also just over the weekend had Shinzo Abe of Japan. His Abenomics has sort of been championed and looks like it's going to be strong going forward. It's maybe meant that we've seen the yen rising as a result. What sort of tips, if you were a trader going into this week and over the next sort of couple of weeks with this news, what sort of little tips would you maybe pass on to traders looking at who are focusing on specifically some of the majors like the euro dollar and of course the yen?
Well, I think as euro dollar, I think the trend, as with most dollar pairs, is still in the favor of the dollar. I wouldn't be too aggressive in that trend at the moment as we are in a correction up, but as soon as we have the first premises of the euro dollar rolling over again, I would start jumping into it. On Japan, I think what the Japanese central bank has been doing has short term been doing a lot of good. We see GDP growth accelerating, and there's a lot of hope there. Now, can they sustain it over the long term, and is that not a strong risk against their financial credibility? But that's a question maybe over the next year or so. But for the time being, it seems to be working, and so it's still favorable for the dollar yen.
Jean-Francois, thank you very much for coming in today and sharing with us your thoughts on this analysis.
Well, thank you for having me again.
That's all we've got time for here on Dukascopy TV. Of course, stay with us throughout the day and of course the whole week as we continue to bring you further interviews and updates. But for now, goodbye.